from Lumen jumps on shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 10:02. And again, from a roll call introductions, the way that we take roll is for you to go to the webpage and sign in and log your attendance and also what agency you represent. So Daryl has that display up on the screen, so please make sure you do that before you get off the call today. And then the first item on our agenda is a presentation from Holly about from the Equal Access Committee, and it should be around text to 911. So Holly, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And I'm going to pause really quick. Holly, sorry to interrupt. I'm getting a text from Wes saying that they're unable to get in on the Google Meet. They're saying asking to join. So my guess is he may have the wrong link. The link changed a little while ago. Tim, do you have the ability to chat him on your internal communication and send it to him?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's calling me right now. I'll talk to him.
Okay.
And then
So
I had a separate conversation.
Hi, Wes. Having trouble getting in?
Oh, sorry, my husband's.
So Holly, your call. Do you want to wait one more minute until we get the rest of the Lumen team on?
No,
sure.
we can proceed with Holly's bit.
Okay. All right, Holly, it's all yours.
Sure. I don't have like an official formatted presentation or anything, but as this group is aware, as well as the full task force, the Equal Access Committee has been working on a memorandum to submit to the ESInet user group for consideration of making text to 911 a function as part of the ESInet as we move forward. And so I will go ahead and share my screen. All right, and shout out to Daryl, Joe Benkert, and a couple other folks who helped draft a lot of this. So this isn't going to be anything new that folks don't know, but it is providing a lot of detail on the importance of text to 911. Specifically coming from the Equal Access Group. So that means specifically from a perspective of citizens throughout the state who are not traditionally able to use standard 911. And so we provide some information. I won't read this entire thing. I can share it with the group for you to be able to read it in full. But it essentially provides information on why it is such a crucial need for Colorado to move forward in providing statewide text to 911. Obviously, it has benefits other than just folks who have disabilities and who are not able to use traditional 911 services. Colorado, unfortunately, is well known throughout the country with our mass shootings, and having text to 911 readily available for everybody in this state is a really crucial thing. For people with disabilities, for people who are experiencing emergency situations, when they're not able to call, in situations where somebody may be in a domestic relationship that has turned violent and they're not able to use the phone in a traditional way. I also represent I'm a board member for Deaf Overcoming Violence Through Empowerment, which is a deaf organization that specifically works with victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And the folks who we provide services to, not only do they have to navigate being in an abusive relationship, but they have to navigate how they go about trying to protect themselves, and not having text to 911 in a situation like that is very traumatic. Oftentimes, deaf individuals who use video phones may have those phones taken away from them by their abusive partner, and they are not able to call 911 using American Sign Language. And so having a way to be able to use the cell phone to text to 911 is really crucial in situations like that, as well as those who don't have a disability, who may be in a domestic partnership that has turned violent. And so again, our memo just goes through and talks about some of the specifics on this, about what our population here in Colorado and nationwide looks like in terms of people who may be using text to 911, as well as those who are aging and starting to use, who are no longer able to hear on the phone that they were able to when they were younger and had full access to their hearing. And then we wanted to emphasize that this is not just something that the Equal Access Committee is in support of and is encouraging this user group to implement or to work with CenturyLink for implementation, but as well as stakeholders throughout the state of Colorado. And so we did reach out to a wide variety of different organizations that provide services to individuals who have disabilities all throughout the state of Colorado. And we had quite a few who were very excited to see that this is something that is even being thought about, and that the customers that they serve, that the clients that they serve would greatly benefit from this. So we also have our stakeholder list of organizations who serve people with hearing loss, organizations who serve people with mental illness, organizations who serve individuals with general disabilities. And so there is stakeholder input from this as well, really encouraging the state of Colorado to adopt a statewide text to 911 function that can be part of the ESInet. So that is essentially the summary of it. I will send out this the final draft of this to the working group so that folks can read it in more detail. And yeah, I hope that folks will really consider this. And I know it's not something that happens overnight, but we have an opportunity here with the migration to be able to have this as part of a function of the ESInet. And so I really hope that there's talks with this group and with CenturyLink to really figure out how that we can make this, how statewide we can be a leader throughout the nation to show that this state of Colorado values people being able to have access to emergency services.
So Holly, this is Kimberly. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
And my first question would be for the counties that are in red, and I can, maybe if you don't mind, I'll grab the display real quick and I will show and share the text screen. So to your understanding, or do you know, for the counties that are still in red, how much of their decision to not have text is related to the network delivering text versus decisions they've made locally not to migrate to a text to 911 solution?
I would say, and then Daryl, maybe you can jump in and correct me. But from what we've understood, it's not any authorities who are adamantly against text to 911. It is just the lack of resources they have to be able to implement it on their own, and also a little bit of concern of the finances, even though we know there's several ways to provide text to 911 that are almost no cost or low cost.
So here's where I get concerned, and I agree, text to 911 solution, and we actually have on the agenda in just a moment, Lumen is going to talk a little bit about text to 911 on the ESInet. But Larimer County was an early adopter in 2014 with text to 911, and we offered for all of the counties in Colorado that we would support text to 911 delivery to their area. And I know many other authorities have followed suit since then. And so we still have these counties in red, and in my opinion, they should all be green. This is accessibility. It should never have been a no. I'm not going to do it. And I believe as a 911 body, we have done a really good job trying to remove the barriers to all of our partners around Colorado, because accessibility should be first and foremost. People need 911. We have a tool to be able to get the 911. So I guess I'm just kind of stuck on how much is it of text being delivered across the network that has created the barrier versus a decision locally or the tools, because even if we deliver it across the network, the PSAP is going to have to change on their end to receive the text to 911. So I didn't know if your committee had explored that, or if there's been outreach to these communities that if we move forward with a tariff amendment to allow text across the ESInet, if they would then do their part on their end to be text compliant.
Yeah. So working with these authorities on the grants, a lot of it comes down to just not having any type of people power. So many of these authorities are operating with very minimal people, and this is just not a priority for them. So I think that's a great question on whether or not, if it's part of the tariff and it's available, what PSAPs will be doing to ensure that it actually is accessible for the people living in their areas. And I think that also has to fall back then on the Equal Access Committee for making sure that appropriate outreach and education is being done for them to understand what needs to happen on their end as well. And then, I don't know, Daryl, do you have a better idea with, I know this is kind of before I got involved as much with 911, you had reached out to a lot of these authorities on their reasonings for not providing text to 911, especially since other PSAPs were offering to take those calls. What would you say was the biggest common denominator and why they were not doing that?
Yes, this is Daryl, and I agree with you, Holly. I think a lot of it really just comes down to the fact that they have people who are wearing multiple hats, and they have a lot of projects on their plate without a lot of hands to go around to take care of those projects. So it ends up going on a back burner. I know that when I was with the Resource Center, and then since then, Monica has done the same thing with reaching out to these 911 authorities to talk to them about text to 911, to let them know that there are low-cost alternatives. It used to be no-cost alternatives, but now it's low-cost alternatives. And you know, I think there are just too many other things on their plate for it to register as a high priority. But as Cameron just noted in the comments, San Luis Valley E911 is just a couple of weeks away from getting their text to 911 solution completed. That takes 6 counties off of the red list. So we really have very few counties left. And I know that Monica has said that she's been in talks with Prowers County about potentially being a text to 911 hub for all of Southeast Colorado. So all of those counties in red in Southeast Colorado could become green, with Prowers County handling text to 911 for them, which really only leaves a few others. So then the question comes, you know, would those counties that are already green benefit from being able to receive text to 911 via the ESInet? And I think that really depends on the area. If they're relying on a browser-based over the internet solution for text to 911, and they don't have reliable internet in their area, they may prefer to get it over the ESInet. Whereas if they don't, if they have a direct IP connection, or they have very reliable connection for their browser-based solution, then they may prefer to keep it separate for redundancy purposes. But either way, we need to find a way to get over those final hurdles to getting the entire state text to 911 capable.
Great. So those are some excellent points. And I think what we should do is go ahead and migrate to have Lumen talk briefly about getting text over the network before we move on to a quick project status and then to our final discussion topic today, which is on ECATs. So Wes, I'd like to invite you to comment about getting text across the ESInet, if that was going to be you or somebody from Intrado to give us an update on that.
Thank you, Kimberly. Yes, we're going to have Rich Johnston speak to that in detail, and also really talk about a little bit about the pathway to go from the RFAI to the NENA I3 standard. So I've got Rich invited to be on the call to talk about what inherently can be done to accommodate the text through the ESInet, and I think you'll be pleased with the answer. But it's something that can be worked in stages. So and then later on, after Rich is on, we're going to have Tiffany Chambers, Kimberly, come in and talk about the ECATs from a global perspective. And both of them will have brief PowerPoints and have time for Q&A. So I don't take any more of their time. We're running already 15 minutes into this. I'd like to introduce Rich Johnson, who is a senior manager for NextGen at Intrado. Rich, are you on?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
There you are. And Kimberly, do we want to let Rich drive the prezo here?
Yeah, Rich, go ahead and share your screen when you're ready. Thanks.
Okay. Can you folks see it?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe the short answer to whether or not we can do text across the ESInet, the answer is yes. To be honest, that's what we typically do when we go ahead into a state area. Other areas that we've done the ESInet solution with, we typically deploy text initially across the network provided. The thought and theory behind that is that we're getting truly redundant, diverse, privatized network into the PSAP locations or the CPE location. So that is the preferred methodology. Right now for Colorado, we are directing it to the kind of the interim solution, which is that ITS solution where we do a VPN over the public internet. But to migrate that solution over to the ESInet is not a problem. It would take some configuration, some testing, but it's something we've done multiple times, and we highly recommend it just because of the nature of that privatized network into the PSAP location is typically a lot more available, redundant than the existing internet solution. So doing that, again, standard operating procedure for us, and we can get it done relatively quickly. But I was going to move on generally to talk about a couple of the things of where we were, kind of where we are and where we will be around the ESInet migrations and where we are with RFAI and ESN routing versus where we could be with I3 and GIS-based routing. Before I move on to that, are there any questions about the text? I went through it relatively quickly, but it is pretty cut and dry as to what that migration looks like, and I think the advantages around it.
Yeah, so I do have a question. This is Kimberly, Rich, and my question really, I guess, is for you and also for Lumen, if you can answer this now. But from what you just said, it's pretty cut and dry, easy to do. Is this something that Lumen is going to offer, or is this something that Lumen's going to have to file an amendment and then do a price associated with that tariff amendment to get that in front of the commission? And if so, has Lumen thought about the timeline to do that?
And I guess Wes, I'll hand it over to you.
Kimberly, good question. No, we want to pursue going down this pathway for the efficacy of offering this enhanced feature here. I can let Tim talk about that, but essentially, as Rich said, we can provide the pipe to do this. There are nuances to this, as you know, as well, though, depending upon the PSAP and one-time charges and other things that we won't be controlling. So we've got some things behind the scenes to work at with Intrado on this, but it would be my intention, I think Tim Goodwin can weigh in, is that we would certainly like to add this as a tariff item. Tim, would you have any other quick comment?
Just real quick before Tim comes off mute for that, I just want to highlight that for everybody on the call, is that even if text is delivered over the network, the ESInet, all of that work on your side as it relates to the web application or integration into the CPE is obviously outside of the tariff process, and that would be up to the PSAP authority to work with their CPE vendor, licensing, and that cost. And sometimes there's annual costs associated with that. But I guess just focusing on that core network on the ESInet side. So Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Right. So from a regulatory and tariff perspective, the text to 911 has been that's a difficult, it's been a place where we've kind of danced around whether it's jurisdictional or not, right? Because right now, many PSAPs are getting text to 911 service from a non-BESP. And that product's not regulated. The product usually, and we talked about it, it's not on an emergency service or public safety grade network. So it operates kind of outside of the tariff and outside of the regulatory world for most PSAPs right now that are doing it. I see Bruce in the chat. You've got your own text to 911. I know that some other PSAPs have gone and gotten that. So why should it's a question. Why would we be tariffing it when no one else is? However, at the same time, if we're leveraging the tariffed network that is provided through CenturyLink, Lumen, and Intrado to deliver that, and using capacity, because we have the paths in there that provide the access for both voice and you could add text to that at minimal bandwidth. There's enough room in every concurrent session to allow for the minimal bandwidth in terms of the amount of traffic, the amount of that we're seeing right now, certainly with text to 911, so that its cost is pretty minimal. And then you have the costs on the PSAP side. So how do you do that, right? So we've got things on the PSAP side you have some PSAPs that are Intrado based and some that have other vendors for their CPE at the PSAP location that might not be compatible with a Intrado based solution. So how do you say, well, we're going to provide it, basically allow it to be used, right? Allow the ESInet to be used for text to 911. And if there's a charge for that, how do we charge it equally on an average basis, knowing that there are going to be PSAPs where the CPE situation is different, so that you'll have to do something to adjust that delivery of the the text to 911. So I'm still not in a place where I know the right answer to that, and we've talked about it a little bit, and I suppose we should talk towards a conclusion here before long, or else we're just going to keep talking all the time.
So Tim, would it be helpful if, we understand the need. I don't think anyone is questioning the need of making sure we've got accessibility across the state, which is twofold. It's the delivery and it's the call processing side of the house. And then we have the question, which is to Lumen, if the TCC integrated into the ESInet, so that was the entry point to the handoff, not all the way to the call handling equipment, but just coming across the ESInet network to that demarcation. And so if we wrote it out as a scope of what we want you to look at, even if it was something that was tariffed over the top where PSAP's authorities could then purchase perhaps, but if we outlined a scope and then put some options in there, would that help you come back then and evaluate how you would do it?
Yeah, and I'm particularly interested in how we would do it for non-Intrado PSAPs and authorities.
So my understanding is that, well, and that's a good question, because obviously you pick one of the other TCCs and then that's your delivery. So I don't know if Rich, you can address that.
But let me just back up and just to directly answer your question without putting layers on top of it, yes, Kimberly, I think that would be helpful. But now let's talk about non-Intrado PSAPs. Rich.
Yeah, so maybe from a medium level, we can get lower into it. So Intrado has the capability and does this today to communicate with other TCC vendors, Comtech being the other primary one. It's really about how that text is delivered to the PSAP. And the way I would distinguish that is for an integrated solution versus a web-based application. So if it is a current integrated solution, which does this something called MSRP, which is the way it sends the text to the CPE equipment, then this shouldn't be an issue at all. There should be no problems with that. We do it like we do today. We support Intrado Viper customers. We support Motorola Vesta customers because they're all already supporting this MSRP protocol, which is the integrated text protocol. For web-based applications like the GEM client or the Intrado provided client, in that case, that would remain over the public internet at this point because that's not, though that solution is outside the I3 standards of how that message is delivered across the ESInet infrastructure. So I would say initially that as long as it's an MSRP I3 type of protocol that's supported, and that's supported through multiple CPE vendors through an integrated solution, we're going to be good to go across the ESInet. If it's a web-based application, most likely that would be separate. They would still access that through the web that they do today until they move to an integrated I3 type of solution that can be sent over the ESInet. Does that answer the questions?
I think so, and I think understanding the limitation is going to be helpful to understand what we gain and what the value add is by delivering it over the network. And then,
Kimberly, this is Bruce. Can you hear me?
Yep, Bruce, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I dialed in so I could say something. I think the other thing to consider, especially where those counties are red, is the cost. So if this solution deployed over the ESInet requires that it be within their call taking system, it may be covered. Say we do a tariff, it may be covered through the statewide surcharge connectivity cost if there is any, but there is still a cost on the telephony side of things. Their CPE vendor is not going to turn on that functionality for free. I pay about $32,000 a year for that to be within our telephony system. So when you look at the counties that haven't implemented, that could be a huge impact to them and a huge deterrent to deploying this. They might be better off with one of the browser-based solutions that's very low cost.
So, Bruce, do you know if the Resource Center has captured the data on who in our state is integrated and who in our state is browser-based? I believe I've seen that before.
You know, I think we've captured it on some of the PSAPs, but I don't believe it was captured on all of them. But that'd be a pretty easy piece of information to get.
Okay.
This, excuse me, just a moment. Should have cleared my throat before unmuting. This is Daryl. Yes, I've seen the data on that from the Resource Center's PSAP profiles, and when they never get 100% participation from all of the PSAPs, but I think they have that information for most of them.
Great, thank you.
Well, and I think this year the response rate was very, very high, so there should be pretty decent data there. I had forgotten about the PSAP profile collecting that.
Okay, so to wrap up the text, and I know, Rich, you have a few other items that we're going to need to quickly go through because the I3 piece of it is a good question. It just wasn't on our agenda today, but I do want to hear briefly where you're heading with that. So from a text perspective, if Holly, I believe you're still on, thank you for submitting the letter to us. That's fantastic. We're obviously wanting to move forward with this. Sounds like Lumen needs a scope of what the ask is so they could understand the price, but we also need to evaluate the value add by bringing text in over the network. And so I will work on drafting some of this information up and getting some data from our resource center on what they've collected as it relates to browser-based and integration. So
Yeah, and
go
any
ahead.
thoughts on tariffing, on the tariffing question, right? Because it doesn't make sense. On one hand, it doesn't make sense for us to tariff a text to 911 product when no one else is tariffing text to 911 products, but they're being sold. At the same time, a text to 911 is kind of a call or a request for assistance, and we're delivering it over the tariff. The proposal would be delivering it over the tariff network. So there's some tension there. I don't think that the answer is clear. I think it's easier administratively and easier to figure that out if it's not tariffed like other text to 911 products. But I would welcome folks' thoughts on the tariffing question also, in addition to kind of the technical questions, because that really ties it up. I mean, if we can do it simpler without a tariffing process, it makes the project simpler.
Well, and Tim, I believe we're one of the only, or maybe a few across the nation that has a tariffed network.
Right,
So
California's halfway.
I think we're in a unique space,
Yeah.
just as a foundation to start from.
Yeah. Yeah, California's halfway tariff.
This is Daryl.
There was an RFP, but the RFP response was to submit a tariff.
This is Daryl. So our rules, and Tim, I know you know this because you were a big part of helping to write our current 911 rules, but the definition of basic emergency service in our rules specifically excludes interim text to 911 solutions, which implies that non-interim text to 911 solutions like text 911 over the ESInet would be considered basic emergency service. That being said, any rule can be applied, a waiver can be applied for any rule. I can't state whether the commission would approve a waiver of the requirement to tariff a basic emergency service that's being provided to the PSAPs, but if CenturyLink could make an argument for that, then they can file for a waiver. I think there's also the question of, are the rules require that costs be averaged across the entire area that the service is being offered. But if some PSAPs are purchasing it and some aren't, it doesn't make sense to average it statewide necessarily. So that might also be something that could be looked at as a waiver.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Daryl. That's a good point, and one where we've got to have some discussions with Entrado on how to fairly make this an offering. So in that context.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know what an interim method is. That whole thing about interim methods always was.
Bruce, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I also think it would be interesting to actually poll the PSAPs, those that have not implemented, asking if they would implement if it was offered over the ESInet, and of those that are using a browser-based solution, would they switch to the ESInet if this was offered? Is there a desire from the PSAPs to have it on the ESInet?
And Bruce, just in addition to that, the PSAPs that are already receiving it by direct IP, if it were offered as part of what they're already paying CenturyLink for, with maybe a slight increase, would they prefer to do that? Because I think some of them are paying quite a bit for direct IP connections and may prefer to have a different option.
Yes,
right. And for
yeah. So
go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, the answers may be yes, I would absolutely switch if the price is anywhere reasonable. No, I would never switch. I mean, you kind of indicated that, Bruce, which you said, I like the idea of having the text to 911 and a different network than the ESInet. So that would be maybe I'll never switch. And then there might be a third response, which is I might switch. What's the price?
Yeah.
Well, and I think one more response would be, hey, can the ESInet be a secondary connection?
Right, and I guess that's where we would be, is creating that diversity, because if we had everything through the ESInet, we would lose voice and text, but if we were able to do both, we would have diversity, at least in a text connection. But
so two text to 911
mhm.
solutions. Okay, all right.
Two connections to our integrated solution.
Right.
Rich,
So,
go ahead.
yeah, just a couple of kind of talking points there. One, I think the biggest advantage now to go over the ESInet is that enhanced diversity, redundancy, the increase in availability. There is once we do, and we can say this for another time too, Kimberly, if we're running out of time, but once Colorado moves to I3, then text to 911 has a different kind of feature and function and availability. And what I mean by that is, once you take in the text into the ESInet and it's doing routing based on I3, we can then route a text based on the location of the texter. Right now, until we get to I3, the location is determined by that TCC. So the text comes in and either is sent to the PSAP across their internet interface, or is sent, in this case, if we're in this transitionary stage, would be sent to the ESInet, to the PSAP across the dedicated network. But that decision of where which PSAP responds to it, that decision is made in the TCC. And if it's sent across the ESInet, it's on a more redundant available network, but that routing decision is still made by the TCC. When we move to I3, then that text is sent to the ESInet, where the ESInet will plot that text latitude and longitude and then send it to the appropriate PSAP. And that piece is for the I3 routing decision, that would be necessary to get it to be interconnected to the ESInet. So I think the short-term advantages are the redundant, reliable, available network that ESInet brings. But the long-term advantage is that it has to be on the ESInet in order to do the routing associated to that I3 text versus the transitionary text. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that does. Hey, Kimberly, that might be a good segue to finish going down that migration path that Rich wants to talk about. But just one thing here is that we're going to run very short for Tiffany to talk about ECATS at this point. Should we continue with Rich while we've got him here to segue into this evolutionary thing that we want to talk about for the ESInet to go to NINA I3? And reschedule for Tiffany's time, or can we extend this meeting? Who doesn't want to have about 45 minutes for ECATS, by the way? So
Those are some those are some great questions. I think it's really difficult to extend a meeting without giving people proper notice so they can stay on. So if Tiffany can continue to hang out, because I think some of our questions we can probably start with our questions, which is about our options. So we'll tackle that before the call's over, just to even know if we have an option to get away from Clearview, because obviously that's not a powerful tool for us. So if she's okay hanging out for a few more minutes.
Well,
let's do that. Let's have Rich talk a little bit about the transition, and then talk about ECATS for a little bit. If we need to carry over the ECATS till next time, let's plan on doing that. Before we move forward, though, I just don't want to let that, because I thought Bruce had a very good suggestion. Daryl, is Bruce's survey idea, is that susceptible to your famous doodle polls?
Yeah, we can do that.
Does everyone agree that would be a good idea, or might that be a dumb idea?
No, I think it's a good idea. I took some notes on some of the options. I think it's all about how we ask these questions, but the foundation of what Rich pointed out on the value add needs to be clearly identified, so people aren't answering without knowing kind of the vision of where text is going to go. So I think we can work with the Resource Center and pull something together on that.
Okay. All right. Rich.
Okay.
Great. Can you folks still hear me okay and see my screen?
Yeah.
That's still up? Where it says where we were, where we are, where we will be? Okay. So I'll go through quick because I want me to get as much time as she can. What I want to kind of say in a nutshell is there's I would say two sides to getting to I3. The biggest side is we have to go in and tear out the old legacy infrastructure and set up an IP infrastructure. Also get all the piece parts and functions in the infrastructure available to do I3. And where we are, so where we were, we had old TDM trunks and CAMA into the PSAP. What we've been doing over the last year is migrating that to an IP selective router solution. And we're there. I talked with our project management. We're 90% deployed or so. I think there's 8 PSAPs left. 70% of those PSAPs that are up and running are already on SIP. 30% are still on CAMA. So where we are, we're in good shape. We have pretty much ripped out that entire infrastructure. We are using next generation technologies and network to get the call to 90% of the PSAPs right now. 70% of those PSAPs are accepting that call IP. So where we are with the ESInet is in a good place. Really what needs to be done now is two big pieces, is operational GIS procedures to get to I3. So those PSAPs and their GIS authorities have to start examining the GIS data. We can work with them to compare that GIS data to get those shapes, the street center lines, the address points loaded into our system to be able to start routing based off of that, and then set up the operational procedures to keep that ongoing, to be a daily process. So that's one thing, is to get all the GIS data good and to get the operational procedures set up to maintain that GIS information so it can be used for routing. The second portion is to work with the CHE, the CPE vendors, and see what kind of impact it will have on the PSAP to upgrade their equipment. So really, those two pieces still need to be figured out, but from an ESInet and next generation core services, all the piece parts that need to be in place are in place. And really, it's a configuration change on the ESInet to say, stop using ESN routing and start using GIS-based routing. But the big things that need to be worked on in parallel are working on that GIS information with the PSAPs and the GIS authorities, as well as working with the PSAPs and their CPE vendors to make sure that their system is capable to do I3. They'll have to be reconfigured and learn the operational procedures around that. From the ESInet perspective, we're in good shape. We've changed out the infrastructure, and that capability is available from an ESInet side of things. So, well, I did it quickly, but I want to leave room for Tiffany.
So
Let me know.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. So I guess from a summary perspective, the big picture is behind the scenes, the relationship between Lumen and Intrado. You are working on migrating everything to an I3. You're not saying it is what it is and it's status quo. So behind the scenes, everything is getting ready to be transitioned over to that I3.
Yeah. From a functional perspective, we're ready. We've done it in other, so I3 is live with Lumen on the solution for other areas of the country. So the trials and tribulations of going through that the first time, of supporting it, we've gotten through all that. It's been up and running for a couple of years. So the feature functionality to turn it on is there. The agreement between Intrado and Lumen is there. I think, again, there needs to be some tariff items that need to be addressed, but it's more of operational procedures and PSAP equipment that I would think we would need to focus on, but the feature functionality and the capability is there from a Lumen and Intrado perspective.
Rich, for the PSAPs that are using legacy gateways today, would they be able to continue that in the I3 environment?
So it's a good point. There are some kind of other transitionary steps. True I3 has IP voice and terminating all the way to the PSAP equipment. So to say you could do true I3 and still have a legacy PSAP gateway, that CAMA converter in there, I don't think you could say that. What you could say is, until that point where those PSAPs are ready to accept IP in directly, we can do things like GIS-based routing. So we could do GIS-based routing and deliver the old-fashioned way to those PSEPs until their CPE equipment is ready. And we've done that in other areas of the country where, okay, some areas are ready and their CPE's equipment is ready to do I3. Some aren't, but everybody wants to do GIS-based routing. We can do GIS-based routing, but still deliver CAMA if we need to. It's just not in the I3 format.
So a question about everything you said with GIS and how GIS is so center to everything I3. I believe that there's GIS tools that are available through Intrado that have not been made available across our entire state. So the EGD MS tool specifically, is that something that you're able to turn on? Because I don't believe, I mean, it's a tool. I don't believe there's any extra cost to it, but it will help the local authority manage the GIS data. So is that something that can be made available so we can, on our end, do our part to make sure our data is ready to go?
Yeah, so that's what we would work with you on. I think as we progress, we'll figure out what that looks like. The EGDMS has a whole bunch of different features and functions. One of them is the spatial interface for I3. So assuming we would move forward with Colorado for I3, that EGDMS would be available for, that's our, what NENA defines as our spatial interface. So that's where PSAPs and GIS authorities would upload their data, where it would do all its QA, QC checks on a daily basis and load the spatial information into the environment. So as we move closer, yes, that spatial interface will be available. I think there are other tools that, and unless you can keep me honest here, that I know that Toronto has talked to Lumen about, other things like transitional data management services, onboarding services, all additional services that if the PSAP or GIS authority doesn't want to take it all on themselves to get it up to snuff to be ready to do I3, there are certain services, either one-time or ongoing services that Intrado can help out with.
Correct. Yes, Rich. We're doing some of those things on a trial basis now anyway, already stepping out in that direction.
Hey, Matt, go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's possible, since we have such a federated approach in Colorado with the different authorities, is it possible for us to not off, for example, an interim idea could be a geo-MSAG that is maintained based on our GIS data that we provide. Is it possible for the authorities to not have to all go at once at the same time to a geo-MSAG, so we could sort of have this interim stepstone period where, as they're able, each authority and PSAP in their own case could migrate to a geo-MSAG. Yep. Then once we're all at that level, we can then flip a switch statewide for I3.
Yeah, the answer there is yes. So I guess the good and bad thing about doing this over the last 10 to 12 years is we've always kind of deployed I3 and next-gen services into little islands, which the good part about that is we've had to develop the capability for that to interoperate with other PSAPs or GIS authorities that weren't ready to move that fast. So I think the short answer is yes, we can do either geo-MSAGs on an individual PSAP boundary basis or countywide or statewide or anything in between.
Okay, great. So definitely some options there. And this is a high level and something we definitely want to explore. And I guess one of the questions is, will this require a tariff, the migration, once everything is complete over to an I3? Is that a new tariff? Is that a modification of a tariff? Is it just going to occur with us without us having to go back and modify the tariff?
And I would hand that one over to Tim or
Yeah, me too. Tim, you can have that hot potato. But obviously, the way this has been birthed or set up, it is to be evolutionary, if you will, Kimberly, to go through those steps. And I think that was certainly our intent. But to answer that from a tariff question, I will defer to Mr. Goodwin.
So we have a contract with and a scope of work and all those types of things with Intrado now for the current level of whatever they're providing right now. That expires next year, and we'll renegotiate that. Always, if there's, I think, if there are changes to what our costs are, then we may need to come back and say, all right, well, our costs have changed, so the price should change. And so we would have that right, and y'all would have that right. The term of the tariff is a 1-year tariff or 1-year term. And so, anyone, I think at this point, we've been on for a year. So anyone at any point can come back and say, hey, we need to revisit this and either increase or decrease or, the price, or change some of the things that are offered in the tariff in terms of a level of service or tools like, Clearview versus ECATS or something like that. So, but, we have a long history in this state of not revisiting tariff prices, even though conditions have changed. So we did. We held on. We didn't file. How long was that we did? We should have probably filed 3 or 4 or 5 years before we did, based on counts, because we always were on the ESInet's coming, and so I don't know what we'd have the right to do it. Would we do it? I think it depends on the amount of changes in terms of prices and in terms of what the underlying structure and services and tools and things like that are offered. How much does that change? I don't know. There's going to be a line, and I don't know exactly where it is.
Okay.
Well,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Wes.
no, but as Rich pointed out, and I think we've mentioned it before, there is precedent for this pathway as we go to I3, and that's being done in other states. So we're not plowing new ground to get there. So hey, Kimberly, should we need to give a few minutes to, if we can, here to Tiffany, I think, to maybe set the stage and maybe get some Q&A of what would the folks like to see with a full presentation from Kimberly on ECATS at another time.
Yeah, I think that would be great. So the big ask for ECATS is, can we deploy ECATS at the core of the ESInet to replace the offering today, which is Clearview? So we've struggled with Clearview. We've struggled with getting good data out of Clearview. And so that was our big ask back to Lumen was, can we swap out these tools and is that feasible? So if we want to get that question answered and then schedule the big demonstration for June, that would work just fine.
Tiffany, are you on?
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So to answer your question in a short manner, Kimberly, is yes, we can replace that tool. So as you move over to I3, ECATS at that point would be able to provide you with our suite of ESInet I3 reports. So we do have reports that not only, and that's one of the things that I'll cover when I do have an opportunity to present. I'll walk through what those reports are from an I3 standpoint, but we also have the ability to provide you with complete end-to-end reporting as well. So from the time that the call hits the ESInet all the way through to disconnect at the PSAP. So we can provide you with both. So I'll kind of provide an overview of that functionality, as well as text to 911. I know there's been discussion on this call to text to 911. We do have a suite of text to 911 reports as well. A suite of about 18 reports for SMS. So we do directly from the TCC for both Intrado and Comtech. So I can walk through that as well.
So is this solution, because you stated when we migrate to I3, it could replace it. So is ECATS only available to replace Clearview once that migration is complete to I3?
Correct.
Tiffany, does that include wireless routing analysis as well?
Yeah. So and that's one of the other questions. I will be covering that in the presentation as well. So we do have a wireless routing analysis module, in-depth module, actually importing of your routing sheets. That functionality I will be covering as well.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
Okay, so from everyone on the call today, is there anything specific besides the example of the reports that you would like Tiffany to hit next month? And I guess my big thing is, even if the end-to-end isn't available till I3, is there any part of the ECAT solution that would be available now? So specifically, wireless call volume is one of the items that we struggle with getting accurate data from. So we were hoping that a new solution for reporting would be able to help us look statewide, break it down by SIP session to get good data of wireless call volume.
Absolutely. So, what I'll do is in our presentation, Kimberly, is I'll actually pull the live demo system, so I'll show you the rendering of the reports and functionality. Absolutely. So ECATs can be deployed outside of I3, so we can give you statewide reporting on all of your 911 call statistics, all of your wireless routing analysis, text to 911. We have dashboard functionality. So there's quite a bit of functionality that I'm gonna walk us through. But to answer your specific question, yes, we can absolutely provide you with that statewide view that you're looking for in the interim as you move over to I3.
Okay, so it doesn't have to wait until I3. We do have an option.
You got it. I was referring more so to our ESInet I3 reports. So we have a suite of reports that's specific to I3. I think that's where my confusion came in, so I apologize. So that suite of reports, yes, would have to wait until the migration. But we do have a suite of over, 20 reports at least on the call handling reporting, as well as wireless routing analysis specific to that.
Okay. Yeah, it would be great to see what we could get today, what could be offered today as a replacement to Clearview, and then a highlight of what could be offered once we migrate to I3, and then obviously some of those end-to-end solutions that you can provide that would extend beyond the ESInet.
Perfect. Not a problem at all. I'll be
Okay.
sure to cover that in the presentation.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. And I do apologize that the meeting got away from me today, but a lot of good discussion. So thank
No
you
worries
for
at all.
hanging out. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just need a couple more minutes of everyone's time. I wanted to highlight really quick the status of the project before we adjourn. So just from a status perspective for everyone, we are at 90 PSAPs that have migrated, so 93% complete. The rest of the PSAPs are hopefully going to get wrapped up this month, with maybe some hanging out into June, and that's really our basis that we're working through. So, and then maybe State Patrol may carry over a little bit longer as well. So a lot of progress has been made, and the migrations are almost complete, which is fantastic. From an issues perspective, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of resolution to the open items on the issues. I do want to bring up, and I'll talk about it at the task force meeting too, one issue for everyone to be aware of, and that has to do with routing in the ESInet. We have found that some 911 calls in the wireless area have routed to the wrong PSAP because of some programming on the P-annies. So that means that PSAPs are getting 911 calls delivered to them with an Annie alley, but the caller is truly in a different state or completely different geographic area. So it's not a misroute as it relates to our traditional misroutes that we're picking up on, nor is the call bouncing and grabbing a tower just from a line of sight. It's truly something in the ESInet programming. So if you have a misroute, if you have something that is kind of odd, a strange anomaly, make sure you're reporting those, and you can send them to Vicky or Cindy. You're welcome to CC me. I've got a database started because we've had a handful of those up here in Northern Colorado. So please get in and take a look at the issue tracking spreadsheet. If you want to see a status of the open items, this call routed issue is probably one of our highest priorities right now that Vicky is working on. And if you have issues that you haven't reported or that you don't see identified in that tracking spreadsheet, please let us know so we can have some visibility on them and know what's going on in the network. And that is the status of our project. So I'm going to just turn it over to open discussion, open items from any of the voting members that are on the call today that you would like to bring forward. Okay, great. And then anything from the Lumen team that they want to bring forward to the PSEPS authorities that are still on the call today?
Kimberly, I did see a report this morning on those wireless misroutes where Intrado is working with the carriers to make sure that their database, the carrier, is giving that information correctly to Intrado. So I think there is some nuance that they're working to get through that. And actually it pertained to your misroutes where we were getting that report.
Okay, no, that's great. And I do, it's this handoff and it was hard to find what's causing it. So it's great that we're able to isolate that part needs to be updated.
Right. Yep.
Okay, and then the next item I'll move on to is just public comment. So any non-voting members that joined us today, if you have anything you would like to bring forward. Okay, well, I know we went over and a lot of great discussion. So we have several action items that I took notes on. So I'll wrap all of that up and we'll get moving on the ask and a survey and start to continue the conversation about text on the ESInet. So great conversation, everyone. Appreciate the discussion, Intrado and Lumen. Thank you for that. And everybody have a great rest of your day. We are officially adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Building 3.9 and